Really great. So good to be here again. Great to see you, Alex. Thanks a lot for everything you've done to organize and to be with folks. Rav Shmuel, you're a big inspiration for me, and you live out the things I write about, and so always good to be with you. So this talk I want to give it's based on a teaching of Rav Eliyahu Dessler, who Rav Dessler was one of the great teachers in the Mussar tradition of the 20th century. Mussar being the school of Jewish applied ethics, a 1,000-year-old genre of how do we actually bridge the gap between the things we value most and how we actually live our lives and practically live our lives. And Rav Dessler has an idea called the choice point or Bechira point. I'm zooming in from the Boston area. This is where I make my home, and as Rav Shmuel said, I run an organization called Kirva that takes part of the wisdom I'm going to share today from Mussar tradition, also from our Chassidic tradition, the spiritual evolution of the 18th century, and brings it together with the world of making the world a better place, with the actual work of social change. So I'm going to walk through the source and these sources, and please jump in if there's something that's you're wondering about, or that didn't land for me, or I want to ask more, go deeper into that. Just jump off mute. I'm sharing the screen here, so I can't see everyone. So just jump off mute and jump in, and then we'll have time also at the end as well. So just a little background. And as I said, Rabbi Dessler, one of the main teachers of this school called Mussar, which is about aligning our behavior with our values. And he was writing probably this essay that he wrote was probably in the 1920s, maybe early 1930s. He was from Lithuania. World War I, moved to England, lived in Manchester, was one of the rabbis in the yeshiva in Manchester for many years in England, and then came to the land of Israel towards the end of his life and died in Israel. And so the idea he's working with is based on an example he gives a little bit earlier in his teaching about a smoker. And we can apply this in different ways today. I think the way a lot of us maybe interact with social media or with Netflix or things like that could be is just as good an example. But he talks about someone who smokes every day and is lying awake at night coughing and decides, I gotta stop. I can't keep doing this. And wakes up the next morning and then has a thought, I'll just have one. I'll just have one cigarette. But Dessler says that's the moment where truth meets falsehood for that person, because he knows that once he has that one, he's going to have another and another and another, and then be coughing away at night, the next night. But decides to have that cigarette. That's that's the pull. That's the choice point, is right in that place. So that's his example he gives. And then he gives another example based on an idea of a battlefield, like an old style battlefield, or even a football game, where you have a line of scrimmage and you have two teams coming up. So let's take a look at this. He says, everyone has free choice at the point where truth meets falsehood. Okay? In other words, Bechira, which means choice, takes place at that point where the truth as a person sees it confronts the illusion produced in them by the power of falsehood. And so for that smoker, that falsehood could be, I can have just one. But because of the physical cravings and addiction, other things, there's a lot of pull towards not seeing reality as it is. But the majority of a person's actions are undertaken without any clash between truth and falsehood taking place. Many of a person's actions may happen to coincide with what is objectively right because they've been brought up that way, and it does not occur to them to do otherwise. And many bad and false decisions may be taken simply because that person does not realize they are bad. In such cases, no valid Bechira choice has been made. So he's saying something pretty radical in Jewish thought, because coming from much earlier, Maimonides, the medieval thinkers, free choice, free will is everything over anything. You can make any time, any place in your life, your free choice. He's saying it's much more limited. It's much more limited because of habit, our genetics, past choices we made, other things like that. There's a lot of stuff we're doing, a lot of behavior we're doing that is actually automatic. And it's not actually coming out of we're making choice all the time. And that could be good things, it could be bad things. You could be, trained in a way that you have a lot of good, polite habits. And those you're not thinking about them every time. Or likewise on the other side. So the thing he's saying here is a lot that happens outside of conscious choice and its habituation. And that lines up a lot with what we know in neuroscience now as well. that much of our behavior is automatic and is not actually we're choosing every moment. So he goes on and he says, for example, one may have been brought up in an environment of Torah, among people who devote themselves to good deeds. In this case, their choice point, Bechira point, will not be whether to commit an actual sin, but whether to do a mitzvah with more or less devotion and kavanah intention. So, for example, you're someone who, this happened to me when I didn't grow up with Jewish practice that much, and a little bit, but I really took on prayer, regular daily prayer, when I was in my 20s and then in my 30s. And so it's not really a live option at this point that I'm going to want to do one of the 3 daily prayers or not. Like, I'm so built in, habituated myself to that. But it really is a choice if I'm going to actually pay attention to what I'm saying. And if I'm going to actually have any kind of kavanah, anything like that, any intention. So that's where the choice point is. He says another may be brought up among thieves and robbers. For them, whether or not to steal does not present any choice at all. Their Bechira point might be on the question of shooting their way out when discovered. This is where, for them, the forces of truth and untruth are evenly balanced, right? So for this person, of course I steal. Everyone steals. That's not even a choice for me. Of course I'm going to do it. But I do know that hurting someone is not right, and so I won't do that. So you say it moves. It's not an absolute thing as far as choice. It really moves based on one's background, nature, nurture, all these things. So he says it must be realized that this Bechira point does not remain static in any given individual. With each good Bechira successfully carried out, the person rises higher in spiritual level. That is, things that were previously in the line of battle are now in the area controlled by the Yetzer Tov. That's a Jewish idea of good, clear thinking. You can think about consequences and what's going to happen in the future. Giving into the Yetzer Hara, that's another idea of the impulse for immediate gratification. I want it now. What I want, now. That pushes back the frontier of the good, and an act which previously cost one a struggle with one's conscience will now be done without Bechira at all. This is you call just justifying something or rationalizing a certain behavior. You're going to do that when you do it. And we know this again a lot from contemporary neuroscience and from contemporary psychology. We're often not deciding something and doing it. We're like, we want something at a deeper level, and then we'll rationalize it and we'll justify it in our minds of why it's okay. So that's what we're saying happens here. You make a choice in the direction towards your cravings, your comfort, something like that, and it'll just get easier to do that, and you'll make more rationalizations why it's a good thing to do, and likewise the other way. So this is all I wanted to bring from Rabbi Dessler today. I wanted to set up this idea that much of our lives are actually in the area of habit. We are all made in Salam Elohim, right? We're all made in the image of God, every human being. That's part of our human endowment. And what makes us really human is that Salam Elohim. But as one of my teachers, Rabbi David Lappin, says, we're not living that most of the time. We're not living our Salam Elohim most of the time. We're living robotically. We're living based on prior habit. And at certain moments, we actually get a moment to actually live our divine image and our full humanness and bring that out. And this tradition of Mussar that I teach, we really wants to have more and more moments like that. We're more and more really acting on our deep humanity and our deep connection to Hashem, to God, and our spirituality, and not just in a kind of habitual way that comes a lot out of fear, and driven by fear, driven by past traumas, things that have happened to us that have really shaped our lives and the way we act in the world, often for no fault of our own. But we're acting fairly robotically. And when we get more scared, we can get more contracted and end up acting more and more in the direction of not like reality as it is, but the way we're habituated to. And I think this is where a lot of suffering comes in the world, and it's the way we don't actually meet the challenges that are before us. Before I go on, now I want to get to Esther. We're right at the cusp of Purim here, so I want to get to the Esther of this next piece. But before I do that, I just want to see, I just said a lot. Just want to see if there's anything up right now for people on this concept before we go into applying this to Esther in the book of Esther. Let's give a second here, see if someone wants to jump off mute. Okay, we'll go on. So this is that's our framework here. Now, I think Esther gives us a model of someone who is in one of those habitual places, from past generational experiences. Not sure if we're going to call it generational trauma, maybe, but certainly past ancestral ways of being, and that keep her in a tight, habitual way. And what we're going to see in the Purim story really calls on her to break out from that. And so let's take a look here. This is from the Midrash, Esther Rabbah, and it's based on the verse where Esther says that she hasn't told. When Esther, just to review the story, there's a contest. The king has deposed his former wife, and they're searching for a new queen. And they invite all the women, who want to come and come to the palace to go through this, and to then become, to see if they're chosen by the king to be the next queen. And so Esther, who was from a Jewish family, her uncle Mordecai brings her there to be part of this. She ends up becoming, when she's there, she doesn't tell anyone that she's a Jew. So she hides that. It says, Esther had not yet made known her family. She didn't let know that she was Jewish. So the Midrash goes on and says, this teaches that she put a ban of silence on herself, like her ancestress Rachel, who also put a ban of silence on herself. So this is the habitual behavior. There is this, for some reason, there's this ban of silence. Now, we know from Rachel, well, let's read it here. All the greatest of her descendants forced themselves to be silent. Rachel put a ban of silence on herself when she saw her wedding presents in the hand of her sister and said nothing. Okay, so just a little background there. This is the story of Jacob, and he has these two sisters, and he loves the younger one, Rachel, and the older one, Leah, is he doesn't. But their father switches things around, and he said he was going to give her Rachel's hand in marriage, but ends up giving her Leah. And Rachel sees what's happening, and hides that she knows about the switch that's being made, and doesn't say anything about it. And so that must have been a very painful thing, you can imagine, for Rachel, that she was doing this on behalf of her sister, because she didn't want her sister to be shamed. But it really, it was hard on her, and then she went on and really suffered from not being able to have children for quite a while. But anyway, she took on this ban of silence. That got then passed on, and again, we know these things get passed on through our genetics. Sometimes certain patterns of behavior is going to pass down from one generation to the next. So Binyamin, her son, also forced himself to keep silence. How do we know? The proof is that his stone in the high priest's breastplate was jasper, indicating that he knew of the sale of Joseph but said nothing. Okay, we're getting a lot of background here on biblical stories that don't show up in the Torah itself. So Binyamin was the youngest of the children, and his brother was Joseph. They're both from Rachel. They're her two children. And at the point where the other brothers were selling Joseph into slavery in Egypt, Binyamin knew this was going on, and he kept silent. He said nothing. Why he said nothing, we don't really know, but he said nothing. And the breastplate of the Kohen, which we actually just read about this in last week's Parsha in the Torah, the high priest, when he goes in to do the sacred service in the temple, wears a breastplate on him that has 12 stones on it. And those 12 stones represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And the one that represents the tribe of Benjamin is the jasper, which in Hebrew is Yoshpeh. Yoshpeh is a play, we could play on that word, we call it Yesh Peh, which means there is a mouth. And so Benjamin's stone is a play on the word there's a mouth, but he was silent. And so it's evidence that he also took on this family pattern. So next generation, Saul, her descendant, the king Saul, the first king of Israel, was a descendant of Rachel. And also with him, concerning the matter of the kingdom, he told him not. He didn't speak about what was happening. So he also had this silence as well. And so Esther, and then down to Esther. Esther had not yet made known her family or her people. So we see a familiar pattern here of silence. And I think that pattern is not just silence, but it's expanded a little bit. If you look at the book of Samuel and King Shaul, there's a very big scene. This actually also, we read this in the Haftorah a couple weeks ago. Or was it last week? Maybe last week. That the prophet Shmuel had told King Saul that his job was to wipe out the tribe of Amalek. Amalek, which was the arch enemy of the Jewish people. And he was supposed to do that and not take any animals, not do anything. And it ends up that he didn't follow through on that. He left alive the king of Amalek, a guy named Agag, who ends up being the descendant of, the ancestor of Haman, who's the enemy in the Purim story. He leaves him alive, and he also allows the Israelites to take thousands and thousands and thousands of animals that they wanted to sacrifice to God. And God is not happy about this because he told Saul to do something. He didn't follow through on it. And when Shmuel comes and confronts him, he says to him, Shmuel's all very proud. He's like, hey, look at me. I did this thing. I did what God told me to do. And he's like, well, what are all these animals I'm hearing? You weren't supposed to take those. Why am I hearing that? And he says to Shmuel, oh, well, the people really wanted it. And I was afraid, that I wanted to follow the voice of the people. So what kind of leader is that? So Shmuel says to him, though you be little in your own sight, are you not head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you over king of Israel. And Shaul said, but the people took of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the chief of the devoted things, to sacrifice to God. And so it looks here that Saul is afraid of the people. He's a leader who's afraid of his own people. And that person cannot be the king of Israel. So, while the Midrash above told us about silence, that was a trait, there's something here also about kind of a contraction of self. Maybe an overly smallness, even though this is the king of Israel, so it's a very big role. He fights battles, he's a great warrior. There's something of a smallness of him, of a privateness, of a kind of not understanding his own greatness that maybe is also something that's being passed on as well. Maybe you can call it a modesty. Maybe it's a modesty, but it's a modesty that actually can be not helpful at certain times. So I want to add that to this idea of silence, of being quiet, is a certain intense modesty. We see this acted out again in Saul's daughter. Again, this family pattern is what I'm trying to track here. So in a scene where Saul's daughter married King David, this is Michal, and King David was bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem for the first time to get it established, where they were establishing Jerusalem as the unified kingdom of the Jewish people of Israel. And King David was the opposite kind of personality. He was very kind of throw caution to the wind, not modest in that way, and had his own issues, but was like very, very out there and able to take a lot of space in public. And so he is dancing, and the Torah describes, the book of Samuel describes that he's actually doing somersaults and really doing pretty intense stuff. And his wife is disgusted by this. So it says in 2 Samuel, and it was so, as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, that Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before Hashem, and she despised him in her heart. She despised him. Wow. Then David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, it's interesting, she keeps saying it's the daughter of Saul. I think they're making a point here of the family pattern. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came to meet David and said, how did the king of Israel get himself honored today? It's like a very snarky question. Who uncovered himself today in the eyes of handmaidens and his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovers himself? She's really laying into him here about his behavior. And David said to Michal, before the Lord, who chose me above your father and above all his house, to appoint me prince of the people of the Lord, of Israel, before the Lord I make merry. So he gives a pretty snarky answer back there. The point I want to make here is that there's something, like, she couldn't stand it, that he was so exuberant and so out there. So again, there's a modesty here. Again, it might not be the appropriate modesty, but the modesty of bringing things in, an internalness that seems to be passed on in the family. All right. So now what happens? Now it's a point where it's a crisis. You have Esther, who's now in the palace, and the decree has been made against the Jewish people that Haman has got this decree that they're all going to be killed on the 13th of Adar. And Mordecai tells her, she doesn't know about it. Mordecai tells her, you've got to do something. You're in a place to do something here. And her first response to him is, I can't. I haven't been called in to see the king. It's against the rules and I can't do it. Here she is really following along in that pattern behavior of modesty and silence, that I can't say anything. And that pattern is going to be deadly if that goes through. If she really sticks with that pattern, holds on to that pattern behavior, she's not going to be able to save the Jewish people. And that's at stake for us in these pattern behaviors. And these are very everyday, very real for us. We all have them. We all have different things that have been handed down to us through our families, our own patterns of behavior, our own trauma-induced, kind of patterns where we're tight in certain ways. And that kind of tightness or kind of reactivity that is not our Tselem Elokim, not our true divine image really showing up at certain moments, can really help make situations go badly. And we're not as wise and not as skillful as we need to be in that moment. And that's at stake here. And the whole Jewish people's life is at stake here. Is she going to break out of that pattern or not? And thank God we see she does. That Mordecai challenges her back and says to her, if you keep silent, right? If you follow that, if you just stay in that pattern, that comfortable pattern of yours, in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place, while you and your father's house will perish. Okay, so that's again back. Where did this behavior come from? And who knows? Perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis. That was his really forceful argument back to her, and it was successful enough to really break her out of this. To understand, Malchut in Jewish spirituality, that's kingship, the kingdom. You've been put in royalty for just a chance. What royalty is, in a kind of a Jewish mystical understanding, is more about you're receiving something. It comes from what is God's mission for you at this moment. What is your Tselem Elohim? You're being made in the divine image. What is that calling on you to do at this point? That's our Malchut. That's our royalty, is being able to respond to that. It's not about ego or anything like that. It's what are you being called on to do right now? And he's able to say it in a way that she's able to actually take it in and realize, okay, so how does she respond? She says, she sent back this answer to Mordecai. Go, assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast in my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. These were the 13th, 14th, and 15th of Nisan, right? This isn't happening. This is happening in Nisan when this whole event happened. That's Passover. He sent back word to her, but these include the first day of Passover. Now Mordecai is being more cautious. And she replied, Elder of Israel, why is there a Passover? So now she's being the really bold, big one who's, declaring a fast even when it's one of the major Jewish holidays. Mordecai then went and did her request, as it says, so Mordecai went and did all according as she commanded. So let's look at this. What is she doing here? What's she able to do? She understands that I need to break out of this pattern right now, which, as we all know, is unbelievably difficult. We're not even aware of our pattern behaviors, a lot of us anyway. And even when we are, to do something that goes against our fears or our whatever, no, I just don't do that, To go against that is incredibly hard. She's able to tap into, okay, this is a moment. I need to tap my divine image of myself and show up in my full humanness for this moment, which is, and then what she does is she says, I'm not going to do this alone. I want everyone to join with me, fast on my behalf. And I'm going to have my maidens with me also. So that may be an important part of this as well to think about. If we are going to try to challenge some long-standing pattern behavior, maybe better not to do it alone. But make sure you have people with you and you're connected and you have a good gang to go with you as you try to do this. And she's able to do it, and that really moves the whole story forward at this point. And so what Pesach offers us is Purim. It really offers us this opportunity to take a look and see, like, what are those things? What are those places where I'm kind of stuck in a pattern, whether it's my own choosing or my own habit or it's ancestral? Like, where am I stuck there? And Purim has this ability to be able to flip things upside down. We say nafochu. We say that everything was flipped. The Jews were supposed to be destroyed that day, and they went out and they were actually able to defend themselves against their enemies. And they had a day of joy instead of a day of mourning. Things flip upside down. How am I able to? What would I like to flip? How might I flip it? And Purim offers us a spiritual energy to be able to tap into that. Now, it's not easy. It takes work to do these things. But often when we can make a choice, going back to Rabbi Dessler, when we can make a choice in the direction of our full humanity, in the face of fear and pulls not to do that, that actually opens up and releases tremendous energy into the world and into us to be able to do that. And so I really see this moment in the story as a model of that, how she's able to actually release the energy of salvation by being able to step into her full humanness and her full divine image of who she is, and make a bechira, make a choice against the falsehood and against the smallness and the pattern that she was caught in. So I want to add one last thing, and then I'll stop. Let's see if there's any conversation about this. From Rav Nachman of Breslov, from a different tradition. This is from the Chassidic tradition of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. That's the lineage that I locate myself in. Rabbi Nachman lived around 1800. His student died in the mid-1800s in the Ukraine. And I don't have a translation, so I'm just going to say it in English here. I'm sorry I don't have a translation of it. But he explains here that Mordechai, not about Esther here, but more about Mordechai, in numerology, his name is the same as Rav Chesed, which means great kindness. He has great kindness. And Rav Chesed is related to an idea of a love that comes from really understanding and knowing how connected we are. How connected we are to God, how connected we are to each other. So he really embodies that. And he goes on, he says there's other kinds of love that are more smaller, that are more localized, how we like treat someone well or something like that, or treat someone kindly. But there's really a greater, more universal sense of deep connection to all that motivates a really great love. And he says that's really, Mordechai really holds that. And because he's able to really tap into that and he understands that, he had the power to be able to break even the most evil Haman, even the most evil, which at that time was Haman in the story, or Amalek, his heritage, which was the arch enemy of the Israelites. And he's able to really shatter that that what's called the klipa, that husks that make up that. And because he understood and knew of how deeply connected everything is, and he is to everything. No one, was able to really do that with Han before that, because they didn't have that level of understanding of deep interconnection. And so when one, he says, Kishizochim, when one is able to attain that, you actually have an ability to understand that even the most kind of, I don't know, evil is the one word that keeps coming up for me, but the most kind of like anti-human, harmful kind of things and behaviors that people get into, you're actually able to understand that, you know what? Those two are even drawing their energy from holiness and from God, and that nothing can actually exist in this world. It's not saying they're good. It's not saying that they should be doing what they're doing, but it's understanding that there is something in there that is connected to holiness as well. And the recognition of that, what Nasa is saying here, the recognition of that is enough to be able to actually flip it and be able to actually break that evil and that bad behavior, because you know that there's actually something holy in there. And so I bring this to just say that I think that's also what's at stake here, is that when we can tap into our humanity in a really, really deep way, we can actually then also tap into the humanity of others. And sometimes, I don't know if always works, Mordechai is like this great, I'm not saying we can do that, but a lot of times that can actually, seeing that can actually help us be able to change a situation, be able to bring more humanity into a situation, maybe even sometimes convince or shift people who've been our opponents, and maybe acting in really inhuman ways. Maybe we can shift that as well. So that's, I think, what's at stake in making these choices that go towards our divine image as opposed to into our habituation, into our past traumas. So I want to end with that and just say, like, I think Esther gives us an incredible model. And first of all, it's great to have a female model. We don't have that many of them in Torah. And to have a female model who is like really breaking through and showing us a way that we can actually behave in deeply heroic but also deeply human ways. And may Purim really be a time for however you observe it, however what you do tomorrow and tonight, that the spiritual energy of the day enables you to make that step towards your most Tselem Elohim, your most being made in the divine image. May that impact the world. So let me stop there as far as the presentation and just see if there's anything anyone wants to pick up on anything I said.
Thank you so much. Yes, we'd love to open it up. If anyone has questions or comments, please feel free to raise your hands and we can call on people to unmute. And you can also any comments or questions?
Okay, since no one's hopping in yet, I'll go first. Thank you for that. That was lovely. Very thoughtful. And I guess my question is, to what degree you think of the Tselem Elohim, that all people have this infinite dignity, creating the image of God, as just universal versus having an individual, particular dimension to it? So why do I ask that? Because I hear this one piece of wisdom you're sharing, which is that one kind of has to overcome a little bit of who they are and who they've become to change themselves to meet the moral moment. And Purim can be a vehicle to get there. But there's this other wisdom I often hear shared, which is that people should find their calling that's unique to their personality. You should have kind of a personality alignment with your mission. Know who you are and your unique Tselem Elohim, and only work on the issues that really are aligned for you and stay in your lane. So does that make sense? The Tselem Elohim universal versus particular, and how that relates to when do you say, you know what, I should lean into this universal humanness, you called it, to meet the moral moment, versus like, this is out of my lane, this is not the calling for me because I have a unique personality and a unique moral mission that feeds who I am. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let me share a thought. I'll see if I got what you're asking. So I think it comes to us. I don't think you actually choose it. So I think that I very much believe in the second thing you said, as far as like the idea of mission. We call shlichut in Hebrew. And so the idea of mission is you feel like, who am I? What are the needs of the moment? What are my, kind of line all that up and like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So I'm doing this, and I found like for me, like I'm, really into spirituality, really into justice work. So I'm going to bring those two together. I'm doing my thing. That's like the lane I'm in. I totally believe that. And I think that is a way, people should do things. The second thing, like as far as like meeting the moment, the universal Tselem Elohim, I don't think you choose that. I'm going to go out and like, show my Tselem Elohim. I think it's more Hashem reality like brings that to us. And what you want to be able to do is meet the moment. You want to meet the moment, and that moment comes to you, and you find yourself in that moment. And if you're living aware enough, you're like, okay, I need to do something that may be like not like in my patterns. It may be really uncomfortable, but I don't think it contradicts the idea of having a lane and having a thing that you're doing most of the time. But we're going to hit sometimes if we're aware and need to show up in different ways. Just like, just like Abraham, just like Abraham, at the Akedah, he didn't ask to have to sacrifice his son, but, it came along and he had to show up in a very different way. Was that getting at what you're saying?
Yeah, I like what you're saying, and I like that distinction between kind of the choice and kind of what comes to you. But let me just push a little further, if I may. I can imagine someone giving a class that said the opposite. There's a Yetzer Hara to jump onto whatever comes your way. There's an inclination to get off your mission. Like, I'm not the women's rights person, I'm the gay rights person, or I'm not the Israel advocacy, I'm anti-Semitism, or I'm not the loud leader, I'm the quiet behind the scenes leader. And how do I know this thing that's coming my way is, just a distraction or really kind of this higher calling. I mean, I ask this because I'd like to be able to guide people because I think people feel very flustered right now and frustrated, and there's so many things happening, they don't know where to turn. What's this calling, and what's the choice? So can I push you a little further?
You can, yeah. I mean, I might just end up saying the same thing, but let's see. I think I think people do need to have their lanes and do that. And as far as activism now and all kind of stuff, I'm the anti-Semitism person. I'm not the Israel advocacy person. Like, that's great. You're the anti-Semitism person, but when the Israel advocacy person asks you to sign a petition, you can sign a petition. Like, so you have. I think we have our areas that we should hopefully figure out our areas. Doesn't mean we can't dip here and there and there and there. Whether I just want to go within what you're saying. So then, for the anti-Semitism person, the Israel advocacy opportunity comes up, and it's going to be like they're going to go on a board. We want you to come on this Israel advocacy board, and it's going to be the next 3 years of your life. You have to do it. That's where you really have to do a serious, internal investigation. That's a little different than what I'm talking about. I think I'm talking about something that's more in the moment. It's like a momentary thing, and you find yourself in it. So Esther was in the mall. She was a queen. She all kinds of stuff happened to get her there, and then boom, she found herself in a moment where she had to rise above her pattern behavior. It's a little bit different than what you're asking. I think that thing you were saying, I'd be very careful about that. If something else shows up and it's I'm feeling pulled to this, I'd be very careful about just following after those things.
So following the rape of Dinah, and Jacob sort of sits back and says, this was a bad thing and you could get us all killed, but he doesn't do much anything else about it. It isn't until his deathbed that he complains about his sons.
Right.
Should he have done something more at the moment? Is that what this is recommending?
Should he have done more? Should he have done more as a father? He clearly saw they had a certain pattern of behavior that was violent. And so on his deathbed, he did kind of give this command, they should be spread out. And then we saw that. The Levites were spread out all across, because of that thing. Should he have stepped up more? He's a great model. He's a great person to look at because he's certainly a flawed character, and he's got all these moments, and choice points that he seems not to do. The coat of many colors, a lot of things he seems to do that don't seem like really the greatest thing. I don't know. That moment to me always struck me as a very strategic moment that he needed to get out of town. We need to get out of here before these people come back, and try to get us. So, Yaakov is, if you want to look at what is his essence, he's supposed to be balance, right? He's supposed to be truth. He's supposed to be balance. So I don't know. We'd have to think. Was that a balance moment or not for him to show up or not? I'm not sure. It's a good question. I'm curious. Steve, did you have a question?
Just a comment.
Yeah.
First, I love the phrase "stick to your lane." I've never heard of it before, but it makes so much sense to me. And I don't think it's as restrictive as we might think at first, because in sticking to a lane, if I could use some comparisons, if you're a smaller basketball player, you're not going to play center, but you're still going to play basketball. The center will not play forward, but he or she will still play basketball. You're a basketball player. I don't want to think that sticking to one's lane is restrictive. For instance, a chord on a guitar or anything. There are a bunch of strings, and I don't know music that well, so I might be stepping on something I shouldn't be talking about. One note, or on a piano, you can have a low C and a high C, and you're sticking to your lane because you are a C note, but it doesn't mean that you are not expansive. You are doing wonderful things being higher and medium and lower. So I'm sort of, as usual, not making my point other than to say that lanes are not restrictive. That's the way we are, and our job is to embellish ourselves according to the lanes that we're in, and not be turned off if something new pops up, because I also believe in evolution, that our thoughts and thinking evolve. My meandering is over.
No, I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of expansiveness within the lane. Right here. A lot of expansiveness. Yeah. Yep. The point I'm hoping people, one of the things I hope people get from this is that to kind of see where are those choices for us. Like, where are choices between kind of what you know is habitual behavior. It doesn't necessarily mean like your uniqueness in your lane. It could be like we know things about ourselves. Like for her, it was a quietness and a silence and a modesty. That was kind of the way she always was. Like, I'm that kind of person. I'm just that kind of person. And then the moment called for something else. Like I do a lot of consulting with board chairs of organizations, and we had this woman who was just became board chair for the first time, and she's a more quiet person, more humble, more modest, and actually, anyway, she had to start giving talks, in front of lots of people, and it was really hard for her because she felt like that's not the kind of person I am. Well, you are in this position. You actually need to step into something else, and I don't think that's a lane change, but I think it's a showing up in what the moment is calling for from you. And so that's choice plan. That's what I wanted to point our attention to, is like those moments in our life where we're being called on to do something uncomfortable that feels out of our comfort zone. And maybe not like what we call the panic zone, but out of our comfort zone. Can we show up? They're calling us to show up in a different way. So.
I would just like to share that this was absolutely wonderful. I mean, it's the first time I've heard this take on this story. But it hit me very personally. Mm-hmm. My mother's Hebrew name is Esther. And I am in the process of revamping and going back to giving some talks. I spoke in front of the United Nations, and I shared my story with some professional organizations as well about my story of being born dependent on drugs and growing up with parents that were both in active addiction. And it's very, very hard to stand up and give those talks. But I know that I have to break silence. And so it's just so timely that I'm going to be doing this again this weekend, and I've been a nervous wreck. But my whole mantra always is that nothing that is concealed can ever be healed.
Wow.
So I just want to tell you how much I appreciate this stuff always works this way, the synchronicities, and it's really beautiful. And I just wanted to let you know how much you personally touched me with this.
Thanks for letting us know, Lauren. I wish you a lot of hatzlacha, a lot of success with that. And you see, maybe you do this already, but you see Esther's model also was not to do it alone, but to make sure that she had some good people around her. So I hope you have that as well.
I appreciate those last comments very much. I wonder how Purim can actually work to help us with this. Can you help us think about how Purim can be a vehicle? So one of the things you said, if I heard it correctly, v'na'afochu, the Purim is an upside down day, that we can kind of imagine the world, we can imagine ourselves a little bit differently by flipping everything. And I wonder, like, Purim is so busy, like for those of us who are delivering Shelach Manot or running to Megillah or Matanot Le'Evyonim, like there's all these different mitzvot, and there's meals and there's songs and there's all these things happening. Like, what would it look like to have a reflective space for Purim to actually work to help us to do this? Do you have any kind of any advice on that?
Yeah, thanks, Willie. Let me give you a little bit picture of what a Breslov Purim is. And this is the tradition, the Chassidic tradition that I align with. The evening is more of a, not subdued. It's joyous, Megillah reading, it's fun. But we actually take time in the evening to do something called Hitbodedut, which is an unscripted prayer practice where we take time to just alone. I like to do it just out, everything's quieted down a little bit later tonight, go out in my backyard and just talk to God. And if talking to God's not your thing, just to have some reflective time. To really think about, like, what is this? What needs to be turned upside down right now? There's enough in the world. There's a lot to pray about in the world that needs to be turned upside down. But if you want to think more personally, Like what, what is something? What do I want to break open? What is something that could use breaking open? Rabbi Nachman taught that, implied that Purim is the beginning of the year. It used to be Passover, was we count the months from Passover, count the months from Nisan. He says now, post-Enlightenment, it's Purim, because the world's so chaotic. What do I want to tap into that's actually a real source of change for me? So that's one thing I want to offer as a piece of advice, is just to have some reflective time, actually. Because if you are the way you described, it does, it is very busy. So in the quiet, maybe of tonight, at some point, give yourself a few minutes of just quiet reflection, or talking to God, if that's, that's something you do, about what is it? What do you want to overturn? What do you want to open up? What do you want to change and shift? That's one thing. And the other is, the whole costume thing, some people do that, some people don't do it. It really is an opportunity. It's a great opportunity to try to inhabit something different and shake something up a little bit. So tomorrow I'm going to be this character in one of Rabbi Nachman's folktale stories that's about this guy who's almost like the village idiot kind of. He's very simple trust in God. That's his thing all the time. And, I could be a little more thinking about things and caught in my head a little bit. So I really try to take that on tomorrow and try to embody that. Other times I've taken on a little bit. I can get a little nervous sometimes, so sometimes I've been a relaxed person. That's what I take on for Purim. So I would say those are two of my pieces of advice. One is have some reflective time, and two is to actually use the whole costume thing to try to shake something up for yourself. Oh, good. Nice to hear that, Pam. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Jaffe. It was a pleasure to learn with you, and thank you all for joining us. Our next class will be next week on March 20th at 1 p.m. Pacific time. We'll be learning with Ethan Davidson on Shimon and Levi and the Massacre of Shechem, so we hope you can join us for that as well, and want to wish everyone a Chag Sameach and a happy Purim.